But we do need to look at this incarnate part to recognize that there are things that we need to do to get the right results. Faith without works is dead. And so the story goes from the book of Mark, the 5th chapter, the 21st verse. And when Jesus passed over again by ship into the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter, she lies at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing better, but rather grew worse, when she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. So this is interesting. When that woman with the issue of blood touched Jesus, Jesus was going to Jairus' house to lay hands on his little daughter who was sick and dying. And while he was going there, this woman heard about Jesus, the woman we all know about with the issue of blood, and she came to where Jesus was, followed him, pressed her way through the crowd that was pressing against Jesus, and she touched him. Verse 27, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment, for she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, You see a multitude all pushing against you, and you said, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. The woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. And that's real interesting in so many ways. There's so many things being said in those couple of verses there. So many more things than I even have to offer, but I'll share what I've got out of that. First, I want to share with you that Jesus was going to Jairus' house to lay hands on his daughter who was dying. And this woman that had an issue of blood means she had been bleeding, and that bleeding couldn't stop. And if you're bleeding continuously, you're weak, you're anemic, you're sickly. But evidently, if she wasn't bleeding fast enough or long enough or much at a time, that it would kill her, because it said she had had this issue for 12 years. What I find very interesting is the daughter of Jairus was 12 years old, and she lay dying. And this woman had this issue of blood for 12 years. Which, if this thing had come about her time, when she was probably about 12 years old when this blood started coming. And so it's like you have this daughter of Jairus, who was a ruler in the synagogue, so that represents a church. And his daughter, that which was birthed from him. And this woman that had this issue of blood that had been bleeding for 12 years, she had probably started bleeding about the same time this little girl was born. So this little girl was 12 years old and she was dying. And this woman had been bleeding for about 12 years old the same time this girl came into the world. And this girl has to represent the church because her father was a ruler in the church. And I'm just saying, you look at our situation today, man. The church is really to none effect. I mean, we can look at for various reasons, because there's a lot of issues in the church, a lot of negativities in the church. The church is greatly departed from that which Christ is. I mean, like the love part, the compassion part, and the non-condemning part. All those things that Jesus was. The church is not that today. And for all intents and purposes, the church is dead. It's lost its power, right? When I think of the church, I think of, you go into your parents' medicine cabinet, or maybe your medicine cabinet, and you have all these drugs and all these pills that maybe have been there for so long, and you recognize that so many of them are expired. They've been expired for years. I have some stuff, in my medicine cabinet that I just noticed the other day, and they've been expired for like 10 years. And so they don't work. But they're in the same little container. They have the same label on it. It tells you how many times to take it daily if pain persists and all this kind of stuff. So it looks like it's going to work, but it doesn't work. It's powerless. They've just been sitting on the shelf so long, looking right. They have no power. That's how I see the church today, and I want to share with you this girl, this daughter of a ruler of the synagogue, was dying. Then we take this woman who seems to have been with. What's very important, I think, for this story is that this woman that had this issue of blood, Old Testament law was that if a woman had an issue of blood, if she was bleeding, she wasn't even allowed in the synagogue. So basically, this woman who was sick, who was bleeding, and if you think about bleeding, the blood has the oxygen, the life, the iron, everything is coming out of you that keeps you alive, that keeps you well. She wasn't even in the church, so the whole time the daughter of the church, who is now dying, was alive. This woman was never even in the church because of her affliction. The church rules wouldn't allow her even in the church. So the church was dying. And the people who couldn't even go to church, they're dying as well. That's the symbolism here. So this girl that's dying is a daughter of the church. 12 years, as long as she's been alive, she's been dying. We have a woman who's been sick for 12 years, and she is slowly, life is coming out of her, but she's not dying. And she hasn't even been allowed in the church, and Jesus meets her right at the middle there. And Jesus heals his daughter. He heals this daughter of the church as well. This woman with this issue of blood touches, and we always want to say, she touched Jesus, and even one of the renditions, because this story is in all Matthew, Mark, and Luke and all, and the story goes to Jesus and maybe John, but Jesus says, who touched me in a couple of those renditions. But as I was reading here in Mark, it's like she didn't touch Jesus. Touched his clothes. She didn't even touch Jesus. She had her mind made up that if she could just touch his clothing, it says if she could just touch the hem of his garment, she would be well. And then Jesus turned around and said, "Who touched me?" Because it says that he felt that virtue, he felt that healing power come out of him, and took care of business, healed this lady, and she was made well. And it said that she was, as we read, that she was trembling and fell at his feet because she knew what had been done with her. She was already healed. She was already well, and she knew it. I mean, imagine that. You had been sick and dying slowly for 12 years, no hope, gone to all these physicians, spent all that you had, not just your money, but your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations of a future. Everything was gone. But at that moment, she knew that issue that she had within her was dried up, and she was well. She fell down trembling. Trembling what? Trembling excited. Said she was afraid, fear, yes, but come on now. She was no longer sick, so what's he going to do? And he said, "Daughter, don't be afraid. Because of your faith, you have been made whole." And so I really want you to see, so many things in the stories, but one especially, that the church has been dead or just about dying. And I want to say, because of all the things that we have bought into, all the anti-Jesus things, anti-love things. I was in prison and you saw about me. I was sick and you came to visit me. I was hungry and you fed me. Although, wouldn't I do these things? In that you did it for the least, you did it for me. But then he speaks to the other, and I'm saying many of the church people today, many of the so-called Christians today, we need to take these verses to heart, that I was in prison and you did not visit me. Oh, we think prisoners have it too easy. I was sick and you didn't tend to my needs. Well, he made himself sick. He shouldn't have been doing all that stuff. That's what you get. That is the punishment for your sin. You need to consider that. Are we functioning like Jesus? Are we functioning like the enemy of Jesus? And I'm talking to church people right now, because I want to, compare us to that girl who was dying, actually, 12 years. The daughter of the church, the ruler of the synagogue, she was dying. I'm saying today, the church, we're full of hate, we're full of venom, we're full of vitriol. I was, on the internet the other day, right after that Paris attack. And there was a woman on there saying, you know, well, thank God for the guy who survived, you know, thank God for the bullet that hit his cell phone or something like that, and he was alive. But, you know, here we go again with what is blessing. I mean, there were terrible things that happened, but we need to define blessing for real. And so I'm just suggesting today that when you confine, well, and I asked her about that. She said, well, you know, all the rest of the people, if they believed in God, you know, then they were blessed and they should be happy. Really? And then she, you know, accused me of being, you know, a naysayer and not being encouraging. But I'm saying, if you're just saying, you know, the choir preaching to the choir, who's encouraged? Just the choir. Those words aren't encouraging to people who've lost terribly. Well, if you just believe in God. Or something like that. So I'm just saying today that we just need to recognize that we have the church. We haven't that great effect, and I think we put our emphasis on the wrong parts, even on the church. And if we think about it, the ministers, we prop them up. We come to a point of almost worshiping our preachers, worshiping our pastors, worshiping our evangelists, our ministers, our prophets, and all this stuff. But I'll tell you, know what the strength is in the church? The strength of the ministries that are going on in the church, that are attending to those, I was hungry and you fed me. Or I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you saw about me. All the issues and all the lamenting and all the suffering in our communities, that when a church has ministries that are actually meeting those needs, that's what's sustaining the church. That's what's keeping the church alive. It's not the pastor. It's not the ministers. It's not the preacher. It's not all those people that have all that airtime that we're looking at. The people believe it, but they believe it too. And one of the most humbling experiences that I had was once I was ministering in this church. I was full of folks. And I saw this one guy in there that I knew, and he was an older gentleman. He was like 35, 40 years older than me. And I knew him. He had life experiences. He had God experiences. A good man. I knew that he knew more than me. But he's sitting in the audience with a pen and paper in his hand, ready to take notes on what I had to say. And I'm like, this guy should be teaching me something. And I think what we have often, we as people, we do that. We have preachers and we have ministers that they have been placed in a particular position for a particular purpose, and they're believing that they know more than everybody. And there are people out there of such knowledge, of such wisdom, but of such grace and humility that they just allow, and they just sit and they respect. People are laughing at jokes that they've heard for the 100th time. Look at those ministries within the church that are feeding the poor. Give them some accolades. And just say thank you. Look at the ministries that are visiting the sick, visiting the incarcerated, tending to the needs of the people out there. Give them a pat on the back. Give them kudos. I remember a story. This is about the church today for the moment. Of a man, he was like a great preacher, a great evangelist. And I had this minister, a preacher from Africa, telling this story once. And he was a great man. And thousands upon thousands, you know, the kind of person, you know, that draws the crowd like all ministers would like to draw. And he thought a lot about himself, you know. But he was a good man, he wasn't a bad guy. But every night he would go to sleep, he would have this dream of one of his staff, one of his servants, one of his maids, you know, on her knees, this old lady, and she was always praying and always crying out to God, crying and praying. And every time he would go to sleep, he would have this recurring dream. And he was heartbroken because this was a good woman. And she was always, every time he closed his eyes, he'd have this dream of her just on her knees and just crying and begging out to the Lord. And he was one night, he just prayed and said, God, why is she suffering so? She's such a good woman. What is she praying about? And the answer he got from God was that woman is praying for you. and your ministry, because if it weren't for her prayers, you would be nothing. Brought that man back to a reality. That we all have a particular place, and we need to stop worshiping, particular people, that we all have our place. And we don't know which one of those small people, which one of those little people were the ones that were paramount to the heights that God might have wanted to take us, wanted to take me or take you. And so often, even in the church, even in ministry, we can be dismissive to certain people who might seem to be not really there, not really with it, not really with the crowd I might want to hang with, or that I might put that much stock in, because this isn't the professor, this isn't the doctor, this isn't the lawyer, this isn't the entrepreneur, this isn't the business person. Little did I know that everything that I am in God hinged upon the prayers of that person. And we wonder sometimes why we're dying. We wonder sometimes why the ministry hasn't picked up, why it hasn't grown as we thought it would grow, why the potential that we believed we had, or why the promises we thought we had received from God of what we were supposed to be doing one day, they just haven't come to fruition. And we wonder why. Because that little old lady who we dismissed, and maybe that little lady we didn't see about, that we cut off, that was our ticket. Right there. But for whatever reason, now just consider that and pray about it if you seem to fall into that category. But the church is kind of jacked. There was a Jesus aspect standing right in the middle. The father, the church synagogue, the ruler Jairus, he had to seek Christ out. It wasn't about magic words. It wasn't about a positive confession. He had to find where Christ was. He had to go to where Jesus was. That was his work. He had to find Jesus for real. It wasn't about believing for a transformation one day, or wanting to be this or wanting to be that, or look at this scripture that I understand and all this kind of stuff. The fact was, he realized if he wanted his daughter, who was the daughter of the church, who was the church today, in an analogy, wanted to survive, he had to find Jesus. Now think about that. This is a synagogue. These are the people that didn't believe that Jesus was who he said he was. The people who eventually killed Jesus. This guy is a ruler in that synagogue. Didn't believe Jesus. This man, this was important. It was like, I don't care what I believe. I don't care what I've already thought. Do I really want this thing to happen or not? He sought Jesus out and found Jesus. And he said, Jesus, come to my house. Okay. Come to my house. Church folks, we need to realize that. Think about that. So what does that mean? What is Jesus? We need to bring Jesus to our house if it's dying, if it's dead. And so our house obviously is that place of worship, that church. But what is Jesus? Jesus are all the attributes that he manifests, that he symbolizes, that he taught us. See, we have a day today that we're standing sort of at the pinnacle of making a decision this way or that way. We're looking at, refugees coming in. Oh man, what am I going to be a terrorist? We're looking at Mexicans. I guess all the attention has got off the Mexicans now. We're looking at black folks, trying to, and standing our ground and killing black folks. We got all kinds of things going on, and people in the church have taken up those particular positions as well. We've aligned ourselves with the world, and we wonder why our church is dead. But if you want your church to come alive, if you believe that those things that God promised you that have not manifested, have not come to fruition, and you're wondering why, you need to invite Jesus into your house. And Jesus are the attributes of what Jesus was. You're going to have to begin to challenge some of the things that you've bought into, some of the rhetoric that you've allowed yourself either to align yourself with or to speak. And recognize that Jesus said, love even your enemies. Jesus says, love your neighbor. There was no racism in those days. There was none of that stuff going on. Jesus even said that if something that you're doing, offends your brother, that you need to quit. But I've seen Christians saying, well, we need to fly that Confederate. Come on now. What is it? Do you want your church to live or not? See, God is gracious. God is love. You have your little bitty church. But if the potential for you in God, as you know from years past, was to be this great thing, you might need to invite Jesus into your church, into your house, into your home. And this is for all of us as well. The biggest blessing I had was just, recently, speaking to my daughter who's been raised in the church and leading her to Christ. Oh yeah, I know, honey, you know all about God because you've been raised in this household, but do you know God? It's a great thing. I did that with my son when he was about 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And so now I'm being an example of prayer, and my prayer life is increased because I pray with her on my knees every morning and on my knees every night. And as we grow older, as believers, we don't have to get on our knees, or we can do this, and we can pray driving. Now I'm making sure that being the example, so I've invited Jesus back into my house because of a love for my daughter, like Jairus had for his daughter. No, this is too important to me. I'm not going to keep status quo doing as I have been. No, this is my daughter. This is my child. I need her to be well. If it means I need to challenge my lifestyle, I need to challenge my example. If I need to change, if I need to adapt, if I need to adjust, this is my child. I'm doing it. Jairus knew that. Faith without works is dead. This daughter, this woman with the issue of blood, the same way, she realized, I have to get to Jesus. So we're just going to lay in the bed and pray. And that's good too, I'm saying. But she felt within herself she had to get to Jesus. And even in this, understand this. Jesus was not. Jesus is there. Jesus is with you, and I know that. I preach that. I believe that. But imagine from this woman's perspective, she can't even be around people according to their law. So when she's pressing through the crowd, man, everybody she touched was defiled, and they just didn't know it. But she knew within her heart she had to get to Jesus, to where he was, to touch his garment. Faith without works, she would have been dead. She had to get there. And so Jesus, of course, on his way to Jairus' house, Jesus wasn't coming to her. He was going to Jairus' house. It said she pressed through the crowd to get to Jesus. Jesus was going another direction. She had to press through. Not only was Jesus going to somebody else's house, he had a crowd of people around him. She went to where he was, pressed through the crowd, touched his clothes. Faith without works is dead, but faith with works is life. Just realize that. And what that entails. So that's the story, man. That's the story for the church, for the believer. If you're not feeling like it's working, if you're feeling dead, if you're feeling comatose, if your church isn't alive, you need to invite Jesus back into your house. You're well with God because of what Jesus did. It's like my daughter. I know you know all about God, but do you know God? That's the question. Now, God knows you. But that, God knew Jairus. God knew Jairus' daughter, but Jairus needed to get Jesus to come to his house, okay? Understand that. So you're well with God. I think that's where the church has departed, because we go to these crazy extremes. Now you're going to hell. No, you're well with God. But do you want to be well, okay? So you're well with God in the scheme of eternity from time past, present, future. The time aspect for our consideration, but eternity, God, wherever God is, you are. He is in you, you're in him, all that stuff. But do you want to be well? You want to know God, invite Jesus into your house. And so we know all about Jesus, we know all about God, we call ourselves a Christian nation, but come on, we're not. We're a nation who knows about Christ, who has embraced the book about God. But do we know God? In that respect, every nation is a Christian nation because God knows everyone. But it's not good enough to have the book if you don't know who the book is talking about. We can know all about the character in the book, but if you don't know the character in the book, what's it even for? It's a waste of time. Jairus knew that, man. His daughter was dying. She would have been dead if he hadn't gone to see Jesus. Come to my house, Jesus. You had another guy in Scripture. My servant is dead. Well, Jesus was going to come to his house, and no, I respect your authority, Jesus. Just say the word, and I know he'll be healed. And that was some great faith. This guy, his daughter was dying. He said, Jesus, come into my house. Recognize that. He's there. Jesus is there. And really, now this is the part where the two stories might come together, and I'm just processing this now for this moment. So you had this church that represents the church, which Jairus was a ruler of the synagogue, and this was his daughter, and she was dying, the church, 12 years old. And then you have this woman out here who wasn't even allowed in the church because she had been bleeding for 12 years old. Her issues kept her from even entering the church, okay? I mean, how many folks whose issues keep them from entering our churches today? Jesus took care of both at that same time. And consider this now. The woman was bleeding for 12 years. Her bleeding was not the illness. Her bleeding was the symptom of the illness. Her bleeding was the result of the illness. And so when we look around our society today and we see so many people doing so many things, and you know, it's so easy for us to label that something is wrong simply because it's what we were raised to believe was wrong. But for me, my litmus test on what is right or what is wrong is what you're doing destructive, okay? So if I see that you're abusing alcohol or abusing drugs, I say, yes, that's wrong because it's destructive. And so that for me is the litmus test. But then why would we do things that are destructive? Why would lifestyles be negative? Why would lifestyles, you know, be such? Because the lifestyle and the life choices that are destructive is not the sickness, it's the symptoms, okay? And so this is why the church, another reason why the church is dead, because the church has been so long fighting people's symptoms, have been condemning people's symptoms. I mean, that's a sure sign of a dead church because there is no healing power there. Just like that medicine capsule, that medicine container that's been expired for 10 years, that still looks right, that's sitting up in that cabinet, it has no power. So all we can do as a dead church is just condemn the symptoms of folks, where Jesus' function was not to condemn the symptoms. It was to minister to and to heal the illness. And when the illness is healed, the symptoms disappear. Jesus healed the church and healed that woman. We could say the world, the symptoms of the world at the same time. It's really what the church should have been doing, but it wasn't. It couldn't because it itself was dead. That's where we are today. Long drawn out message. So how does that apply practically to our lives today? What situations do we have going on in our nation right now? We have two primary situations going on in our nation right now. That is the whole immigration situation, especially as it has to do with Syria, as it has to do with terrorism. Okay? And as well, we have the situation within our nation, black folks. Okay? So the situation within our nation with black folks is a homegrown deal. It's a domestic situation. Because black folks have been in this nation ever since its inception, even prior to its inception. This is the church. So even in that analogy, where you had the church and the daughter of the church, Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue and the church that was dying, okay? That, as we could relate today, would be this country. This country is dying because there is a division within its citizenry between every ethnic person, every lifestyle choice person. Now, all kinds of issues are in this nation of every type person, and there's such a division, such fighting, such infighting. Even when we're watching the presidential primaries, we're seeing often such venom, such vitriol for fellow Americans. That's the country dying. See, the problem with so-called patriots, no matter which party they hail from, is a self-proclaimed patriot within a nation is determining that others are not patriots. Because there could be no patriot if there were others that were not patriots. Just as nothing could exist unless there was an opposite, its counterpart. And that's what makes it real. Okay, so a self-proclaimed patriot then is looking at fellow Americans that they are not, which is why they are. And what I'm suggesting is all Americans, but dividing the nation between self-proclaimed patriots and those who are not, is dividing a nation. A house divided against itself cannot stand. That's Scripture. So what does it cannot stand mean? Okay? Let's just break each thing down. If a house divided itself cannot stand, how do we define cannot stand? Crumbling. It's dying. It's going to die. It's over. A house divided cannot stand. Okay? The church, it's our nation today. And I think I can easily make that correlation because the church is siding in this fight. The church is part of this mess. The church is not the light in the darkness. The church is not that light on the hill so all the people in darkness can see. No, the church is all up in that mess. The church is just as dead. And you see that? So in that story, the United States, is domestic situation is that dying girl, the daughter of the church. In this refugee situation with these Syrians, their situation is jacked. They're not allowed in this country. The country doesn't want them here. So many people, you can't come. This is the woman with that issue of blood. She's trying to come. She's trying to press her way here, because she knows she can just get here, she'll be okay. What I'm suggesting is we need to see Jesus in the mix as believers. So they can't expect the world to see this. But we need to see that Jesus is in the mix. And we missed that part. So church folks, invite Jesus into your house. Your church will come alive. And the desire of Jesus is to take care of these people that are jacked up, coming from other nations, coming from other places, fleeing the ills of their lives. They might not even realize why. They don't know why they're bleeding. They don't know why the issues are, but they have determined within their heart, if I can just get here, I'm going to be okay, man. We need to see that as believers. So this is not a political message. This is a believer's message. This is a Jesus message. This is a love message. This is a message to understand why our situation is jacked. And as we close, we can apply it to our lives. How bitter are we? How negative are we? How hate-filled are we? Our situation in life just isn't working out. Our children are jacked. Our families are jacked. Our life, our health, everything about us is so messed up. But I'm a believer. What's wrong? Because you're dead. Invite Jesus into your life, and Jesus would symbolize those attributes of Jesus, those attributes of love. Now I'm getting ready to give you the key. Because it's one thing for me just to tell you this stuff and then sign off, and then you just start either mad at me or wishing you were okay or whatever, but I'm going to help you. I'm going to take you there. I'm going to give it to you. See, I think, and we pray for each other, and we do that, and that's good. I pray all the time for my family, for my friends, for the people, even for these messages that I deliver. But it's time for you to realize the prayer, what I've even begun sharing with my daughter at this point, how you make things happen. Pray for the right things. Now the message I've given you today is you cannot possibly, as a believer, in any way justify hating or not having compassion for anyone else on this planet as you recognize the Jesus that you claim to affix or associate yourself to. And this is not a condemning message from me, because I'm not here to condemn you. I can't condemn you because I know how jacked up I am. That's why I preach mercy. That's why I preach grace, because I know how messed up I am. And so although this might be your area of being jacked up, trust me, I have my areas too. So does everybody. But what I'm sharing with you now is what we all must do, continually do, is God, take everything out of me that's not like Christ. Fill me afresh with your Spirit. I don't have that love and compassion for those people that are coming over here. Please put your love and compassion in me. That's how simple it is. But we have to get off that stubbornness. We have to be like Jairus and recognize my stuff is dead. And it's dying. And when something dies, it's probably not coming back to life, but it can. Jesus can revive the dead. But why even go there? What I share with my family and with my friends, it's a lot easier to prevent a situation from happening than to try to get, once it has totally happened, to get it to come back and reverse itself. So since your situation isn't dead yet, pray these prayers. God, take this real feeling that I have out of me. Take this real hate that I have out of me. For anybody, for any human being. Bring my church back to life. Bring my home back to life. Jesus, come into my church. Jesus, come into my home. And you'll be revived. You'll be well. You'll have life restored. But that inviting Jesus in isn't just the body of Jesus. It's the attributes. It's the attitudes. It's the values that Jesus shared toward all humanity. It's all about. And as we close here, we'll talk about the transformation, because it's all about transformation. Jairus' daughter was transformed from death to life. Jairus was transformed from having Jesus not in his house to Jesus being in his house. That woman with the issue of blood, she was transformed. Her mind was transformed even before she started that trip to where Jesus was. And when she finally touched the hem of his garment, she was transformed. So as I was sharing with my friend and his buddies, as we desire, as we seek to be transformed, we need to recognize it's as simple as touching Jesus. That's where the transformation comes. And the touching Jesus is falling into and embracing the aspects, the traits, the personality, the desires, the value system that Jesus had toward all humanity. That's all that it is. And the transformation that we need to experience for the good, the tremendous transformation is 100% to do with how we're interacting with the people that are around us. And because the people that are around us, I remember Mother Teresa once said, when she talked about the suffering people and the people whose lives were all jacked up, but each of them, she saw them as Jesus in just more distressing costumes or masks. That all the suffering, all the people out there, all the untouchables, as many of the Indian people would call them, were just Jesus in more distressing costume. And Jesus tells us in scriptures, we quoted earlier, when I was here, when I was suffering, you didn't tend to my needs. When I was in prison, you didn't tend to my needs. When I was sick, when I was, all infirmed, when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. Well, when did we see you that way? Well, when you did it not for the least, you did it not for me. Jesus is saying the same thing Mother Teresa said, that all the suffering people are just more distressed forms of Jesus himself. And so we have to take note then from this woman with the issue of blood. So what did she do? She touched Jesus. What did Jairus do? He said, Jesus, come to my house. That is the answer right there, is to recognize that everybody that we are negative about, everybody that we hate, everybody that we don't want to help, everybody that we want to turn away and that we don't want to give any more help to, those are all Jesus in more distressed forms. That's what Jesus said. That's what Mother Teresa said. She did so much for so many because she recognized the message of Jesus. I said all we have to do is, like that woman with the issue of blood, is to touch Jesus. What Jairus realized, all we have to do is invite Jesus into our home. And on our deadness will be brought back to life. It's challenging. It's challenging when we're faced with so much. Choices, so many choices.